Swimming like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We come to you virtually from Seattle and the great PNW. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here, it's the podcast for you. It's where street smarts and book smarts collide. And today, it's going to be a little bit about the brain colliding with all of those. I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today is the inimitable Craig Swanson. Our guest is Melina Palmer, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have Melina here. She is a globally celebrated keynote speaker with a mission to help great brands and the people within them do great things by leveraging the power of behavioral economics. That's the brain. She is the CEO of the Brainy Business, which provides behavioral economics training and consulting to businesses of all sizes from around the world. She has her own podcast, which is highly successful, The Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. It has downloads in over 170 countries and is used as a resource for teaching applied behavioral economics for many universities and businesses. Her first book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, was a finalist in 2 categories of the International Book Awards. Her second book, which was just published, like 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, is What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You. We're going to talk a lot about that book today. Melina, welcome to the show. We can't wait to talk to you. And we'll be talking to you in just a second. Everybody, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts: iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube, and Overcast. I know is what Craig likes. We are, everybody, we are ubiquitous. We come to you from about a dozen cities, including the mothership in Atlanta, Boston, Boca Raton, Charleston, and a whole bunch of new cities. Now, before we bring on Melina, Craig, how are you doing?
Dan, I am doing fantastic. How are you doing?
Well, normally I'd say, "Oh, I'm fine, Craig." I don't even know. Let's say frenetic would be the word for the day. Frenetic. And the reason is, as we speak, there are 4 children upstairs, and they're my grandchildren. They are 5, 3, and twin 3-month-olds. Barb is producing that show as we speak right now. And the dog she's an old dog, and I'm not sure she knows what to make of everything. So that's my life.
I will bet if you put that up on Facebook Live, it would outpull us.
It might, except for today when we have Melina on. But I have a brain thing that happened to me, Craig, and I gotta share with you. So this morning, Barb asked me, "Hey, the babies have this machine that heats the water. So all you got to do is pour it into the bottle. You don't have to heat anything. It stays heated all the time." But it was in the morning. She says, "We got to get it from the blue, which means cold, to the red, which means hot," right? I can figure that out. So she goes, push the button. And so I kept pushing the button, and she said, "You're dispensing the water." There was now water all over the place. She goes, "No, this button, the one push that goes from blue to red. Otherwise, I had water all over the place." I don't know where my brain went. When was the last time you had something, just a brain freeze like that?
My wife and I have talked about this. So when I get stressed, it's like there's this thing going on in the back of my head. I just start losing words. It's like my language goes away, and I will drop words. I have to figure out how to create a sentence where I've just forgotten the word dog, for example. I have to figure, can you do something about that animal over there with 4 legs? I just cannot pull the word dog out for some reason. And it is so frustrating. And that's usually a sign for me that I'm overtaxed somewhere in my life.
So listen, Melina, we're going to bring you in. We're not going to, what we need you to do is we're going to forget the interview. You're going to psychoanalyze what's happened to our brains. What the heck is wrong with this? Is my pushing of dispensing of water Is that something I should be concerned about, or is it because of all of the craziness in my life?
Yeah. Well, excited to be here, and psychoanalyze is one of my favorite things to do. So, really, when we look at our brains, we like to think of them as these supercomputers that are capable of doing a zillion things perfectly at once. And they are in a lot of ways, but they're really built on habits and being able to know what's coming based on what has happened in the past. And when you introduce new things, even where they seem like they should be really small, the brain can get a little bit wonky in the way that it goes to do something. And so where you were, maybe it was a little bit early, it's something different in the routine, and you're pushing it. Maybe the button was similar to like an old coffee maker or something that you had, and the type of thing that you're supposed to press. And so your brain tried to rely on something that it knew and didn't quite work out.
Yeah, so the water coming down wasn't a clue. I think I think that's lack of caffeine. You know, speaking of coffee, that was probably lack of caffeine. And I'm guessing that wonky is one of those words that is a highly technical phrase that all of us can understand. Craig, I know you have a similar question for Melina. I'll let you go.
Well, I don't know if I've got a similar question as much as I just wanted to hear more about so I love podcasts around around economics, and the idea of behavioral economics is kind of this idea that's really fascinating to me. I just wanted to ask, what is behavioral economics kind of as a foundation in terms of what you teach and what you do?
Yeah. So I like to say that if traditional economics and psychology had a baby, we would have behavioral economics. And as you know, Dan said on that intro, the subhead of my podcast is understanding the psychology of why people buy. I've updated that a bit to the psychology of why people act, choose, change, and buy, you know, as we're getting into more of the employee stuff and things like that more often. But really, when we think about our brains, you know, we all have them, but we don't intuitively understand how they work. And we tend to think in shoulds. We should like this. People should see that this is a great value for them. Everyone should buy this. But people don't necessarily do the things that they should, even if they know that they should, right? We all know the path to health being, you know, eating right and exercising. And yet, you know, Cheetos and Netflix is much more enticing in the moment. And so understanding how the brain will actually behave, what people will really do instead of what we think they should, and then better communicating with it is what I do. I, you know, consult and speak on helping people to better communicate with how brains really behave instead of what we think they should do.
Well, you know, Melina, we've had previous conversations about, and I think this segues in what the brain thinks we should do. And from that comes something called confirmation bias. And we were talking a little bit about that pre-show, and I want to bring that up here because since you and I had talked on a previous podcast, I've been able to actually use that in some of the help that I work with people, and we talk about confirmation bias in a sense that our brains almost want us or pushing us to say, well, you're right, and I'm going to seek validation, confirmation that what I'm saying is right, and it throws us into a lot of different potential problems. Can you talk about confirmation bias, especially as relates in the workplace with employees?
Sure. And it's not almost as if our brains do that.
It is.
Yeah, that is true. That is a thing that our brains do. We're all really wired to believe that we're better, faster, stronger, smarter, and less biased than everyone else, including the us of 5 minutes ago. So we are constantly looking for things. So that subconscious kind of brain processing is looking to prove that it's right more than it's not, right? It's not looking for things to back up how it's to prove itself wrong. Isn't a standard setup for the way that our brains like to work and process information. So when we go into a meeting with an employee, someone that we say is really difficult, right? So if there's someone on your team that you say is really difficult, and you go, ugh, Melina's coming back in again today. She asks so many questions. She won't just get on board with what I'm talking about. She's always trying to disrupt the process. Your brain is going to be looking for things to support that thought and that train of thinking, and only really retaining information that supports how difficult I am. Every question is going to be getting into the negative camp, and really everything that your brain remembers is looking at this kind of bad stuff. It combines with something called the focusing illusion, where we focus on the wrong thing. As the employee side of that, if I say, wow, my manager hates me, they never listen to anything I have to say, they will get down a train of thought and just, it's a waste of time. Why even bother? Anytime my manager takes a weird breath or think, oh, they're rolling their eyes, obviously this is a waste of my time, because I focused on the wrong stuff in there. So if we're looking to change our behaviors and those of and have better working relationships with people on our teams, what's really great is if we recognize this, we can look for something else to focus on. So where I was saying, Melina's always asking questions, she's so difficult, and say, hey, Melina really cares about the success of the team. She's asking questions to look at other opportunities. That's a really great trait instead of a negative one, or just looking for things that confirm something else than what's been keeping us stuck. We didn't talk too much about how the brain processes and some of that, and I won't get too deep into it, but going back to that idea of the brain as a computer, your subconscious brain can do about 11 million bits of processing per second. A lot going on of filtering information there. Your conscious brain can do about 40 compared to 11 million. Even if it was 40,000, that's not a great ratio, right? That's not where we want to be in this way. And so if we think about this in the light of confirmation bias, what we like to think is I'm right and everyone, and this is the only way to see things. That's, what our brains do. But if instead we realize that for every one piece of information our brain let in, there were 275,000 other things that we filtered out as not as important in that moment. Is it possible that the thing the other person is saying or looking at is just one of those 275,000 other things that is also correct? We can be saying completely different things and both be right.
I am fascinated by this subject. I was raised, my dad was a nuclear chemist, so I was raised by a scientist. Mm-hmm. And even before I was going to like elementary school, the phrase confirmation bias was something that was used. It's something that as a scientist, you're always trying to prevent. I'm always trying to prevent myself from coming to a conclusion that supports my previous conclusion or finding evidence to support my conclusions. So if I'm aware of this, if I want to try to keep my brain from always trying to find myself to be right, how can I, what tips can I use to try to see the world a little bit more truer to reality as opposed to the way that I am primed to see it?
Yeah. So definitely one thing that we can be doing mm-hmm. is having this awareness. We mm-hmm. can take a step back a little bit and then mm-hmm. say, what am I missing? Right? Knowing that there's mm-hmm. more to whatever the picture is for one. Mm-hmm. And then leveraging a concept of framing. I made a joke about that in our pre-conversation. Mm-hmm. So for everyone who's listening now, framing is that how you say something matters more than what you say. My favorite example here, imagine, you're making spaghetti tonight. Mm-hmm. You got to go pick up some ground beef. 2 stacks at the grocery store, almost exactly the same, but one is labeled as 90% fat-free and the other as 10% fat. Now, which one do you want to buy? And the laughter makes it pretty clear, which I get a lot. And all around the world, everyone always says 90% fat-free is the one that we want. Logically, we know they're the same. They don't feel the same at all. Our brain hears those things very differently. With confirmation bias, the type of question you ask will get you to a very different place than, in one way versus another. So if I ask, what's 5 plus 5 is different than how many ways can we make 10? Right?
Although I was going to say, you could even frame that differently. 10% delicious fat.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Make
And
it a selling
looking
point.
at, yes, I teach at Texas A&M, School of Agricultural Economics, and definitely all about beef in there and the marbling and whatnot, and lots of research in that space. And so, yes, the way we present that information can absolutely change what someone hears. So when you're searching for something, if you look for why confirmation bias is amazing, or is different than is confirmation bias real, or how confirmation bias is fake, right? You can find stuff on whatever you want to find, especially in our world of the internet. And same like, is astrology bogus is different to how astrology is true. Will get you to very different information that can either confirm what you're looking for or not. So being able to look at both sides, ask a question from multiple angles, and try to get a more diverse set of answers before you take any sort of action.
So I'm going to take one action here. I'm going to ask you one more question. We're supposed to go to break, but I think, Craig, if you're okay, we're going to slip this one in. You made it was an interesting comment. We're going to have spaghetti today, and you're going to get the ground beef, and that was at face value, I think of marketing. Okay, how people are marketed to, and that was part of your first book. I also, though, am now thinking about, okay, you're in a business situation, whether you're talking to your employees, whether you're talking to your business partner, whether you're talking to investors, whomever, right? How much plan? I know that we don't do as much planning on conversations and how things are framed as we should. But I think what you're saying is really important. We should be doing more planning before the employee walks in, before you have that difficult conversation with whomever. How important is that?
All the important. Very, very important is what I would say with that. And we can, get into that a little bit more after the break. But imagine, before we go to break here, that you've had a management team working on a rebrand or a merger project or something that's going to be happening, and they've been spending months working on this thing. They just roll it out really quickly and say, okay, it's, tell team was one item on their checklist. They just sent out the email to the managers and say, it's your responsibility to tell your teams about this and do that however you want. In one scenario, a manager says, oh, hey, everybody, like, gather around. I know you're not going to like this, but don't shoot the messenger. I've been told from corporate, like, we're going to be going through a merger. I know we hate it, but like, we got to get on board and move forward, whether you like it or not. Yikes. The other scenario is, maybe that manager to say, hey, everyone, super exciting news. And of course, we don't need to totally unicorn and rainbow everything. But, I know over the years, we've heard people complaining about how ineffective our systems can be, how cumbersome it is that we don't have economies of scale. We're going to be coming together with this other organization that has skills that we don't. We're going to be so much more effective. Your jobs are going to be easier by partnering with XYZ in this new merger project. For everyone who wants to be a part and provide feedback, here's your opportunity. And I'm really excited and hope you are too, and open to all your feedback so we can have some conversations. Same change, but it's not about the change. My framework is not about the cookie, which I'm sure we'll talk about after the break.
Well, speaking of the break, I'm going to head to that now. We're going to take that short break to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, Melina Palmer, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to ask her about cramming for the exam. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. EO Accelerator is a coaching program for Seattle area business owners who want to grow their existing small businesses beyond $1 million in annual revenue. As a small business owner, you face new challenges every day, whether it's deciding how you're going to fill a rush of new orders, puzzling out where to find new customers, or sweating about making payroll. Do you find yourself wishing you had an instruction manual for your business? Well, at EO Accelerator, our mission is to empower entrepreneurs with the tools, accountability, and community to aggressively grow and master their business. This is more than theory. This is entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs, with top Seattle business leaders who have been where you are, volunteering as coaches and mentors in the Accelerator program. Because the hustle will only get you so far. The next level of success is a team sport. Want to hit $1 million in revenue? Join the club, EO Accelerator Seattle.
All right. Thank you, Dan. And welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and the brightest in business thought leaders in the Puget Sound area. I'm Craig Swenson. Our guest today is Melina Palmer. And for our next segment, Hot or Not.
Well, Melina, this is where Craig and I are going to pepper your brain with questions. We're going to put you to the test and see if you think this concept or topic is hot or not, and then why or why not. And as I led going out, I said cramming for the exam. You know, I've always been of the opinion that I'm better under pressure. When my back's against the wall, the deadline is here. I'm not going to I procrastinate till the end, and I'm just better when the pressure's on. So hot or not, Melina? Cramming for the exam.
We're not better under
Come
a deadline.
on. I'm not.
I know. We're potentially more efficient. You know, you're getting a lot of things done. It's not necessarily better work, and it's been proven to be less creative, and you know, you're going to just rely on that status quo. So typically not better.
All right. We're talking about bringing on new employees. What about hot or not? Being vulnerable with employees.
Hot, for sure. You should definitely be looking for opportunities to be vulnerable. I just did an episode on vulnerability loops, which is part of maybe where that came from. But a vulnerability is something that's going to be building out trust. And what feels a little bit scary, we think that trust is something that has to be earned, is something, you know, that we would say perhaps. And really, then there's a great quote that I'll end up paraphrasing here a bit, but really we need to jump into the land of vulnerability and believe that the trust will manifest beneath our feet. So be willing to be vulnerable first. And it doesn't have to be in a weird, weepy, confess all moment. You can be just a little bit vulnerable, and it will help unlock lots of opportunities and trust within your teams.
Well, I have a follow-up to that before I jump to my next hot or not. Craig and I are both older than you. There's no doubt about that. And we probably grew up in a time, Craig, if you remember, where vulnerability was seen as a weakness. That if you were vulnerable at all, it was a sign of weakness, and you could never show that. That is just hogwash, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that there are times where it's important to have that strong face and united front, and that you need to find those opportunities, and letting people in and showing that you aren't this infallible creature that they are not is really not the way to go. So yeah, we definitely, I think Brene Brown has really helped bring vulnerability to the forefront of things, but there is a lot of scientific truth behind that.
So I think there's also scientific truth that if I said hot or not cookies, nobody would say not. I can't imagine anybody would say not, but I'm going to say hot or not. It's not about the cookie.
Well, it's not about the cookie is hot.
So tell the story. You had a great podcast, and I everybody should go to the Brainy Business Podcast. This was a refreshed episode, but it's from October 11th. They should subscribe to your podcast, first of all. I highly recommend it. I listen to them, but I really enjoyed this one. Could you just take a few minutes and talk about the whole cookie thing?
Sure. Yeah. So my framework for change management is the same that I use for pricing strategy. And it's because when we are trying to sell someone on an idea we need them to buy in on, it's the same whether or not money is exchanging hands. So in this case, imagine we're walking down the street, having a great conversation, and then all of a sudden there's this delicious, amazing scent that comes wafting down the street, and it's sweet and a little salty, and there's chocolate in there. And we realize it's chocolate chip cookies that are baking nearby. We're still having our conversation, but are more like cartoon characters now, with our noses like pulling us down the street, trying to find the source of this delicious scent. And by the time we get in front of the store and we see that there's a line, which we very quickly find ourselves in, they say, for today only, we're running this special, buy 3, get 1 free, and here's a free sample. Before we know it, we walk out of there eating cookies with an undisclosed number of them in a bag on our way out, right? So that's scenario 1. Let's rewind a bit. Scenario 2, same street, same conversation. We're walking down, and then someone comes up and shoves a flyer in their faces and says, hey, today I'm selling these cookies, and if you buy 4, you only have to pay for 3 of them. I've got samples. Go, ugh, that guy, right? We don't like him at all. And now our conversation is probably more about bad sales experiences, one-upping each other. By the time we see people in line and are pitying them for having worse standards than we have, because we would never buy from this place, we're using the information to do a Yelp review about their bad sales practices. And by the time we smell the cookies, it just doesn't even faze us. It's more annoying than anything. So in scenario 1, we're buying cookies, pretty much going to happen regardless. And it's not about the price of them, right? It's not about the cookies themselves either. It could be exactly the same cookies in both scenarios, and they could be very different prices. They could have been $3 in scenario 1 and 50 cents in scenario 2. We're buying in one, we're definitely not in the other. And so it's important to know all the same things happened, but they happened in a different order. And this is that it's not about the cookie framework. So price isn't about price. Change isn't about the change. All the stuff that happens before that information is presented matters more than the item itself. So that is it's not about the cookie framework, which is part 3 of the new book, What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You.
Craig, but before you go to your question, I realized I should have just brought a cookie with me. That would have been fun to have a cookie at
That
the
would have
same
been good.
time.
We should all be eating cookies. I think
That's
that should be
right.
a policy for the podcast going forward.
Yeah, all cookies all the time. Love it.
You know what? I'm going to steal one of Dan's favorite questions, and I think it's very appropriate here. So, hot or not? Which hot or not? Street smarts or book smarts?
Well, I think they both
I guess
matter.
it's a choice. I guess it's a choice.
Yeah.
Which is
which
hotter?
which is hotter. I'm gonna say book smarts, because they can inform our street smarts when leveraged appropriately.
Cool. Any good books you'd recommend? If you plug one of yours.
All the books, right? Yeah. So definitely mine, like we said. But one of my favorite books of all time is called A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger. It is just a really amazing book in thinking about innovation and how we frame and consider questioning. He was the guest on episode 200 of The Brainy Business. So if you're looking for one to start with, go to thebrainybusiness.com/200. Such a great conversation in this idea of the power of questions.
Fantastic. I'm going
so
to do
really a great segue. I want to talk about your new book. It just published October 11th. Today's November 2nd. So if I do the math, we're about 3 weeks into it. Talk a little bit about the book, but I'm also very interested in what drew you to write the book. I know as an author myself, there are moments that happen that you say, I'm going to write a book about this. What drew you to write the book? And tell us a little bit more about it and how to get it.
And so we say, what, this old thing? That's not an old thing at all, but yeah. So yes, the new book is What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You. And as we've, said, the first book is What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And they came out very close together. So there were 17 months to the day between publication of book 1 and book 2. And really, while I was looking around, I teach classes. I know I mentioned Texas A&M. I teach a class on internal communication and change management. I teach about pricing strategy, and I've always known there were multiple books in this series. But in determining what needed to be book 2, what was most important, this in the fall of 2021, we're in the midst of great resignation. Everyone's talking about returning to work and hybrid workplaces and communication and employee engagement and people leaving. This was before quiet quitting, but of course, seeing all of what was going to be coming down the line and saying, with everything that's coming for employees at work. And I really believe that, and this feels like one of those dumbest things to say, but I think people deserve to have a life and a career that doesn't suck. Everyone should have a great career and job that they love and a strong manager and not be totally stressed out with everything. And it's possible if we can leverage these tools and understanding of the brain. And so knowing that I, essentially have the formula there of being able to write that book, I knew it was the right time for that. And it came out really in the midst of many, many changes and things at work. So it came out at the right time, to be sure.
That sounds ideal. I'm onboarding a new employee right now. Just broad, are there any like quick little tips for the first 2 weeks of onboarding a new employee to help set the stage for honesty and co-working going forward?
Yeah. So congratulations for
Thank you.
onboarding your
Mhm.
employee, and know that both for you and for this person, there's a lot of change coming up. And so
Mhm.
having some openness to things not being done perfectly right away, being aware of the way you ask for things, and knowing that if they don't do exactly what you expected them to do, to take a moment and look and say, did I ask for that properly? Did I frame that well? That's something that you can be
Mhm.
doing, and looking for ways to do more into the future. But what's also really a great opportunity is to be aware of the curse of knowledge that you have. And the flip of this being, it's not that, I have to wait for such a long time until this employee has this knowledge, but they also have, I call this the blessing of the uninformed. So an opportunity where you can be learning from them about all the things that they see that you've become blind to because they're in the way you've always done things. You aren't even paying attention to the water that's spilling all over the floor because you're so focused on pushing the button, right? And so they're able to see some of those things. And if you open up and ask questions, give them an opportunity to provide really great feedback, that can be valuable. And then let them know up front that you expect them to not know things. You'll be bringing attention to stuff and that they should ask, and give that opportunity. Have lots of room and time where you say, what did I talk about this week that I didn't properly explain well? This is one of my, I hate the term pet peeves anyway, but this is one of my pet peeves when people say, does that make sense? It's really, and my husband says it all the time. So it's okay for me to say, like, it's not, I don't hate the people who say it, but it's a really unintentionally condescending phrase to where my immediate reaction is, well, I'm not an idiot. So yes, that made sense. Right. But people don't want to admit that what you said didn't make sense to them. It makes them look and feel stupid. And so that's hard to do. So instead I will say, did I explain that well? That makes it about me. That's a simple reframe that can make it much easier for someone, and for them to say, I actually didn't quite grasp that. Can we try again? Because it's not about me messing up. It's about that, the boss or something in that way. So that's a real simple little tweak that can be really helpful.
That's great. Thank you.
I love that. I love that very much. And I also love that we have sponsors. And so, Melina, we're going to take a quick break. Everybody, when we come back from that break and return with our guest, Melina Palmer, for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, we are going to put Melina to the test. We're going to ask her to be a little vulnerable. You won't want to miss it. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. And Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors, Idea Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, Kitsap Sun Newspaper Group, PC Fitness Studio, and Upstart Group. Please visit our brand new, I shouldn't say it's brand new, our new and improved website, www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle, to learn more about these terrific companies. Now, back to the show.
All right. And welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and the brightest thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area. I'm Craig Swanson, and our guest today is Melina Palmer for our next segment, Plead the Fifth.
Melina, we're going to turn up the heat here. We're going to allow you to fair catch one. You can plead the fifth once, but if you do, you have to then answer all of our really stupid and inane questions, probably. So anyway, my guess is you are not a fair catcher, so we'll find out. I said we're going to see about being vulnerable. So plead the fifth, Melina. We all know that we can be our own worst critics. Can you share with us something that you struggle with?
Yeah, I think like everybody, imposter syndrome is something that we all deal with, and having a new book coming out or looking at what everyone else is doing and friends that have podcast stats that are better than mine, or books that are selling more than mine and featured in the New York Times, and people that have different degrees than the one that I have, whatever. You always have those moments, especially when something new is happening, where you say, why me, right? Why would anybody want this? And people will see what a fraud I am soon. That's going to happen. And so definitely deal with imposter syndrome. And yeah.
Quick follow on that, because and it's interesting because I've worked with countless presidents, CEOs, business leaders, and they'll even admit that. What bit of advice would you give somebody who says, I have imposter syndrome, even though I have this highly successful company? What are some things that we can just do internally? Because I think we all have those moments, right? What is something we can at least say to ourselves?
Yeah, it is something that everyone who's not the biggest narcissist of all time deals with in some area or another. And I would say too, if you don't feel imposter syndrome, looking for the reframe here, if you don't have that, to know that you're not pushing yourself far enough. You're not doing enough or big enough things if you don't have those moments of, I don't know about this. And so to then condition instead, when you have that feeling of, is that going to work out, to say, wow, I must be doing something really big and exciting if I feel this way, is one thing to be doing. And then also to know that I always used to kind of say I don't know if it's just a thing that ladies deal with anyway, but weight issues and whatever. And to know that at any given day, someone could wake up and be horrified to be me, right? There is a supermodel somewhere that would wake up and be me and be really sad with the body they wake up with. But there are many other people who would wake up and be delighted. I'm always someone's before picture and someone else's after picture. And to know that we all have lots of opportunity in the world around us.
I love that. Me at my worst is someone else's aspirational best at times.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's good to remember those moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you look back at your career, who's been most influential on you in your life's journey to where you are today?
I would say it's actually my husband. And in a lot of ways, he is the person that helps me push through when I have those moments of saying, well, no one would ever pay this much for me to speak. Like, this would be the cap, or nobody would want that book, or nobody would want this. And he says, why not? Of course they will, and also he's an incredibly strategic thinker and the most ridiculous planner of all time. And so he can really see into the future in a way that's really helpful as I'm shaping the business and looking at problems in a different way, and also allows a lot of space for me to be able to do things like write books when I have a 4-month-old at home.
That is really great to have someone in your life like that. I sometimes get frustrated at people in my life that have faith I will figure it out, when they're putting an awful lot on me. And yet I know that there are other people I have confidence they'll figure it out. But when it's me that is facing the unknown, I can sometimes not know that I'm up to it, even though I have been in the past.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So plead the fifth, Melina. We talked about framing way back in the beginning of the show. What are the top 5 wording mistakes that businesses make, whether it's in their marketing or to their employees?
Yeah. So this is episode 2 of the podcast. So we're going way back in time there. And so in this, they are being too vague and now I'm going to have this, hopefully you have the notes there for whatever I will miss in this process. So it's being too vague, talking about too much, being too okay, now see, I've psyched myself out that I'm gonna miss the deal there. But really, we tend to try to say too many things, and we don't get specific enough with them. We aren't as focused. It's too confusing that we don't let people know what they need to be doing. It's too boring. So we get into commoditized industries and just get to be the same sort of stuff over and over again. And I think then the last one is going to be too much, but I potentially said that already. But again, thebrainybusiness.com/2 has those. And to know that the big lesson here is to be thoughtful about what you want someone to do. If you can only get one thing from this one thing that you're sending, it'd be great if people go all the way to the end of the rainbow and buy the biggest package that you have. And, if this is the first time they're ever seeing anything from you and it's a single email or a Facebook ad, maybe that's a bit extreme of an expectation on that. So if this one thing does one thing, what do you want it to do? And then make it in the least amount of words as possible, the least amount of communication. How can you get them to that next step? And then the next step and the next step in their own little buckets.
That's great. I'm also realizing as you're talking that you're able to remember what all the number of all your podcasts were. You're able to go back. It makes me want to just pull up one at random and start quizzing you on this.
Yeah.
So you're open to that? I was gonna take you a different direction, but you want me to throw a number out?
Yeah. I mean, of course, with 233 now episodes, there are some there in the middle that get a little bit mucky, but there are quite a few that I definitely know.
All right. Well, what's a good podcast number if we want to focus in on scarcity and what our minds are under scarcity?
So scarcity, I think, is 18 or 19 or 20, maybe. It's right in that early part. And so that is a spot to be looking there. 14. I'm going to say 14.
It is 14.
Yeah,
oh my
I know,
goodness.
just as I'm going through it. So I know loss aversion is 9, and then scarcity 14, availability bias is 15, framing is 16. We'll just go from there.
Greg, I don't even know which
I'm impressed.
episode this is. I think it's one.
I know.
I think I looked at it at one point. I think I know. Now I've got a new assignment.
I was emailing Dan yesterday and said, what episode was this that this person was talked to? We don't know any of this stuff. And you've got it all right there. It's amazing. It's great.
Yeah, I do a lot of cross-referencing of content. So I have a lot of those top of mind for sure.
All right.
So I've got one last question. I know Craig's going to then ask you about how to get in touch with you, buy your book and all of that. But I got to get you to jump into the DeLorean. We're going to jump into the DeLorean and go back in time to I'm going to even go further than 18 because you're young. I'm going to send you back to 13-year-old Melina. You get a chance to, without messing up the time continuum or anything, you get a chance to give advice to 13-year-old Melina. What would you tell her?
So one, I think it's very important to note that when asked what my favorite movie is, Back to the Future trilogy, I feel gets to be one movie and it is my favorite. So
I didn't lose you with the DeLorean, right?
I'm a big fan of this whole situation. And I would say that the advice I would give to myself at that point. So 13-year-old Melina was absolutely going to be a singer and actress and whatnot. And for a long time, that was all I was going to do. And I'm still on stages and things, so it's not too far, but would say that the thing that you think is the limit is not even close to what it is. And at any point when you think this is the top of a goal, just to think further because you're not dreaming big enough, and go find Erin Palmer as soon as possible. That would be the
but don't mess up the time continuum. We know that, Melina, right?
No, it's worth it. Worth the risk.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right, Melina, thank you so much for joining us on the Shrimp Tank. For listeners that want to find out how to get in touch with you, how to get your books, is there a place that you can send them to find out all about you?
Absolutely. So thebrainybusiness.com is the easiest place to go. You can find my books and podcasts and stuff about speaking, consulting, training, teaching, all of that is there. And also then for your listeners, if they want to go, and I'm going to take 1 minute when we hang up and I'm going to set this up, but they go to thebrainybusiness.com/shrimp tank. Then anybody who's listening can go get the first chapter of either of my books for free to be able to give it a read and say, is this really for me? Is it worth investing in? You can go get that at thebrainybusiness.com/shrimp tank.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we will put a link to that on this episode. Everyone who's watching, you can get the replays at the shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and subscribe to us in wherever you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, Apple, Google. As Dan mentioned, I'm a big fan of Overcast. Follow us on our show social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and just stay in the loop with us.
And Melina, we're going to ask you to stay in the loop. I have so many more questions. I think Craig does too. We'd love to have you back again in the future, but and I just can't. I listen to Melina's podcast. You should too. Thank you for being here, Craig. I don't know if we're smarter today, but I sure feel like we're just a little bit. Our brains are a little bit smarter than they were when we started. Everybody,
well, I know exactly my podcast feed is smarter. My podcast feed is smarter because I've got Melina in it.
That's right. Everybody do exactly what Craig said. Like us on Facebook. That's where we live stream every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific. Our next show will be Wednesday, November 9th. We will this time, I hope, have Aaron Murphy from ADM Architecture. We were going to have him a couple of weeks ago, but his son made it to the tennis district finals or something, and we allowed him to go do that instead of the podcast. And now he's coming November 9th. Linda Popke will be my co-host. In the meantime, be safe, be well, be prosperous, and Melina, this is for you. Be thoughtful, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond, and the